Hello, and welcome to the Modeling Success in Action podcast. I'm joined here today by Robbie Spier Miller. So, Robbie is a hypnotist and an expert in communication and human performance. Since 2006, she's helped thousands of people individually and in organizations large and small grow through challenges and achieve greater success. Welcome, Robbie.
Great to be here, Jessica. Thanks for having me.
It's awesome to have you here. The special thing I want to note is not only are those credentials part of what's going on with Robbie, but she's also my mentor. And she has been a huge catalyst in the launching of this podcast and the growing of my business success and the success of countless other students that have gone through her mentorship and Hypnosis Training Canada. So I thought that she would be the perfect guest to start off this modeling success in action and really kind of help us lay the framework for what is this modeling thing? What are we even talking about here? Where do we want to take this? So Robbie, please, tell us a little bit about yourself and, why you really are the perfect person to help us explore this topic.
Okay, sure. So I started to do this professionally because I learned it earlier on to help myself. So I saw the huge benefits that hypnosis has for our lives. And before I started to learn this, I was upset with myself because I kept doing the same routines and patterns that were hurting me over and over. And I would write in my journal and say, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Why can't I be like this person or that person? And what really helped me, the first thing that really helped me was when I started to study hypnosis, I learned how to ask the question, how can I? Which is what modeling is all about. So when we grow up and we're learning from our family of origin, we go through as children what's called the modeling phase. And so we do that from around the ages 8 to 12 or 11, around that time frame. And so in that time, we're learning from watching other people. We really do that our whole lives, but that's a more intensive time for that. And so what happens is that as adults, we've learned all kinds of things from the people around us. Our family of origin, often we either do what they do or we rebel against it and do the opposite of what they do. And also we choose ways to cope. So if we're going through challenges in our lives, we're going to choose a way to cope. And often we'll just keep doing that because our subconscious mind will go, oh, you chose that way to deal with the situation and you survived. And I mean this literally because our subconscious mind's job is to protect us and help us survive. So if we survive, our subconscious mind thinks it's a good thing and we'll keep doing it. And then it becomes a habit. And so this work is all about being able to find examples of people who are functioning in life better than we are and being able to step into doing things the way they're doing them so that we can kind of fill in the gaps of our learning or correct the sabotaging things we might have learned and have some new choices. And that's really the basis of all the work we do here.
Yeah. So it's a really experiential learning by example.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when a little kid is learning how to walk, they're watching all the people in their life around them walk and they're going, "Hey, I want to do that too." And so they'll go in that direction, right? And first they crawl and then they're cruising, right? And then they might stumble or fall. And eventually they're walking and running and playing soccer or doing gymnastics. And it's easy for little kids to learn because they don't have a sense of shame around stumbling and falling. They just get up and they do it again so that they don't have any perception of that. And so one thing that really gets in the way of modeling is either shame or sibling rivalry or competition or resentment of others. So sometimes people really look at life that they are living their life to express themselves. So they believe that they are who they are and they're just expressing themselves in the world. And so when those kinds of things happen, it becomes more difficult to model. So sometimes we need to help people let go of some things. I mean, I know I grew up in a family where there was a lot of pressure to achieve in certain directions and a lot of shame for not doing that. And so I didn't feel a lot of permission to experiment, if that makes sense. So I had to definitely grow through that aspect of things because there were certain things I was really good at and I like doing those things over and over. Like as a kid, I learned to play piano, and once I knew a song, I loved playing that song over and over. But if you gave me a new song to learn, God help ya, I would avoid doing it. Right. And it was because I wasn't associating like fun and discovery with learning. I was associating shame or hustle or discomfort or boredom with learning. So I think that if we grow, I know many people have had this experience as kids. It's very common. It would be lovely if all of our parents were able to raise us in an ideal way, but usually that doesn't happen. So the work that we do helps adults really take responsibility for their own lives and fill in those gaps or make those shifts and changes so that they can function better.
Yeah. So it's teaching them to look for other role models when the ones that they had growing up weren't necessarily the ones setting them up with the tools to be the most useful version of themselves in life.
Right. So
Yeah.
so a great way to look at this is that there are so many people in the world who are excellent at everything under the sun, right? You can always find somebody who's excellent at something. So we have access to that. If somebody else can do it really well, we can learn how to do it really well too.
Okay.
And
So
so we're looking at things that way, and then we're seeking out those people.
yeah, once we've found those people, once we find somebody that we go, hey, they're interacting in life in this really useful way, or they're being successful in the way I want to be successful in. So then how do we use them as a model?
So you can learn a lot about this from watching how actors get into a role where let's say somebody was going to play the role of an astronaut. There's a form of acting called method acting where that actor would go and they'd find a real life astronaut and they would get to know them and they would watch them as they go through life and they would walk the way they walk and they would talk the way they talk and they would embrace the values and attitudes and beliefs and behaviors that they have. They'll watch how they're interacting with life and they're going to do that, right? They're going to step into that role and they're going to behave that way. And then they play a much more convincing job of being an astronaut because of that, right? There's a lot of insight into how does the world look from this point of view when we're actually in it. And so that's really how we do this. So let's say that you found somebody who was really confident at speaking in front of people, public speaking. If you were to move your body the way they do and pay attention to the world the way they do and have the same attitude as they do about public speaking, it would be much easier for you to have the same type of experience speaking in front of a group.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wisdom that we gain from the experience of stepping into somebody else's world.
Uh, so if we don't necessarily have direct contact with this person, say this is somebody that it's a public figure and we admire them and we've been watching the way that they interact and we really want to try that on for ourselves. If we don't necessarily know, what they're thinking or their values, how do we go from there?
I think that it's very important to give yourself the freedom to guess, right? To say, if I were to imagine how they're looking at things, what might it be? And to go on that hunch and then have a discovery based on that. Sometimes we can also watch interviews of people, right? Or watch how they handle certain situations. So if they're a famous person, how do they handle a challenge? Can be very useful. If you know people personally, watching is really more useful than asking because people often, if they tell you what they did, it's not true to what they actually did. Sometimes it is useful to ask, how do you handle this type of situation? But it's even better to actually watch them in the situation. So one thing that I do is as I go through life, I'm looking for models everywhere for everything. So I'm going to notice, and it could be models for what's useful. It could be models for what's not useful, because sometimes I might be doing the unuseful thing too. But when I see somebody else do it, I realize, oh, wow, look, I see the downside of doing that. Right. So it can go in both directions, but it's looking at, characters in TV shows or movies, your family or friends, the people you work with, famous people. So we've got to be willing to have that kind of have some artistic license to guess at how they might be looking at things.
Yeah. So how do we keep ourselves then out of like the judgment of, well, it's okay for them, but it's not okay for me kind of,
Mhm.
thinking and mindset.
Yeah. So when you're modeling, it's very important to not have any judgment at the beginning, to just be willing to literally do what they're doing and for a period of time. Because until you have that insight, you have no way of knowing. But if you're saying, well, they can do that, but I don't know if I can do that, then sometimes it's a resistance to being willing to do it, right? And getting the insight. Like if we've never done it before, how would we know? I know, like for me, one of my challenges is that I have an older sister who's a year and a half older than me and super smart and very precocious in her childhood. And so I kind of grew up in her shadow. So every new thing I was discovering, she was judging, not on purpose. She was just being a kid. Right. But everything was kind of mediated by her point of view. So I couldn't just discover for myself. I was always seeing things through her eyes. So I didn't feel a lot of freedom to discover. So sometimes I'll have the reaction of resisting being like somebody else because of that, right? Because I know that I've had to, as an adult, go in other directions to have my own life, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just one example, but sometimes we're jealous or resentful of people. Sometimes we're really over celebrating uniqueness, where if we were modeling, we could have a better life, right? So it's lovely to be artistic and creative and unique, but you don't want to do it at the expense of making your life better. So you can do it when you're doing art or, hanging out with friends and having fun. You might want to choose to be willing to agree to model in other situations, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
When you say this, like this resistance or this resentment piece, it makes me think about a client that recently we were choosing a model for her that was a more flexible model. It was somebody who was interacting in life in a more flexible way. And when they were in the session, they got into it and they could see the perspective of this model. They could try it on and they kind of felt, oh wow, this feels easier. This is great. And then they went home and their homework was to go and model this like this week,
Right.
step in it and really do it. But she comes back and she goes, I was judging myself all week long, going like, did I pick the right model? Right. If I do this, what's it going to mean? And she was kind of worried that if she surrendered and did what had to happen and actually stepped into that model, well, then what happens if you are more flexible in the world? Right. There's some maybe fears or perceived dangers to that, right? Well, if I let go of this old system I was running in, like what happens? So that was always, kind of an interesting thing
Right.
that comes up with modeling.
So, Jessica, what that shows you about that client is that she has this fear of making a mistake. And so, every decision she's making and every action she's taking, she's going, am I doing it right? Right? Am I doing it wrong? What's going to happen if this or that? So, she has shame about learning. Right.
Yeah.
Which is very different from just tinkering with it and saying, I wonder what would happen. So you would want to do some work with her to give her feedback on getting over a fear of scrutiny or a fear of being wrong and making friends with this experimenting and trial and error learning. So she needs to shift her values and beliefs and behaviors so that modeling is safe. And years ago, I had a weight loss client who was resisting moving her body, and she said to me one day, that she was embarrassed because she thought that if she went out for a walk, that people would say, who is that overweight woman walking down the street? And I'm using her words with this, right? So she was worried that people would judge her or make fun of her. So what we did was I just went out for a walk with her. So I took the lead where she didn't have a choice. She had to come with me and walk the way I was walking, right? So she was modeling the fact that I was walking. And through that experience, she discovered that it was okay and that nothing bad happened and nobody even noticed. And right. And so sometimes we need to help people even have a little discovery like that. And then they start to realize, oh, wow, what else is possible here? Oh, this was easier than I thought.
Yeah.
So she might need some of that as well. But putting this on the table so that people realize, oh, right, I'm not doing this because I used to be in all this fear, or I used to worry that I was doing it wrong. And well, so what would happen if you did do it wrong? You could just do something else, right? That's the truth. So sometimes we need to help people with hypnosis have that discovery, because things kind of become, I think of it like things become fossilized. So if you've been interacting with the world a certain way for a long time, even if the positive intention of it is outdated, it's still there, right? Like it's just it kind of takes on a life of its own. And so we need to pattern interrupt that and have the person have a discovery so that they believe that something else is possible.
Yeah, we jumped right into some phobia theater and faith. So we clean that right up. But when she came
Yeah.
back in, I was like, okay, and now what happens if you put on the glasses of the model? Oh, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So the mood or the attitude of modeling is curiosity, it's
yeah.
playful, it's discovery, and obviously do it within sometimes we need to put a frame around it. Um, and it reminds me of the story Sin. So there's this story by Milton Erickson, who's considered one of the fathers of modern day hypnosis, where this young woman came to see him, and she was worried that if she did many different things, God would strike her down. She was raised in this very very rulesy religious way. And so she really was afraid to do anything in life. She couldn't go see a movie. She couldn't, smoke a cigarette or whatever. And so he got her gradually, and this was decades ago. These days you wouldn't encourage somebody to smoke a cigarette, but he did, because this was a long time ago. Um, but he step by step helped her have experiences, but he would put a frame around it and do it in a safe way. So gradually, as she had these different experiences, one day she said to him, "Okay, I wanna have the experience of getting drunk." So he said to her, "Okay, so make sure that you unplug your phone and close all the windows and lock the door and don't talk to anybody, and go ahead and do drink as much as you want." And so when he followed up with her, she said, "I'm glad you told me not to call anybody and to lock my doors, because I was acting really silly." And and she said, "And the next day I had this wicked hangover." And so he said to her, "Well, now you're free to have as many hangovers as you really want." So she had this experience, and now that she's had the experience, she can make choices around it about what she actually wants, right? But if we're in rules or old habits, we don't even know what we want or what's useful.
Yeah, we're imagining that we know.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another part of that story was she went to cook rice, and she didn't realize that rice expands, right? So she was saying, "Oh my God, I didn't realize that this makes so much rice." But now that she's had that experience, she knows, and she can make a different choice. And so being really like having fun with that and being really self-accepting and open around that, it goes a long way to making this way easier and more attractive for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we find a model and we've, decided that, hey, the way that they're interacting, this is useful, as we're watching them, what are we getting curious about?
Well, we want to watch how they move their body. We want to either like sense, right? So we want to match, like you can match their breathing, their body posture, their tone or tempo of voice, the intonation of their voice. And you want to at least guess at how might they look at the world. So we're all going through life wearing glasses. And so we're looking at what glasses might this person be wearing. So we're noticing what attitudes they have about things. One example is my mother-in-law is great with people, and she spent her whole career working she's from Mexico, and she married a Canadian, moved here, and she spent her whole adult career working for the Mexican tourism office in Toronto. And so I noticed how great she was with people when I was learning this. So I asked her, tell me some stories about when somebody was difficult or you had a sticky situation. And so as she was telling me these stories, I started to realize that her values were appreciating people. And so she always put that first, no matter if somebody was being difficult, right? Or odd, or she would always get curious about what, where, and she would even sometimes ask them, why does this matter to you so much? Or where is this coming from? And she would really take that time to appreciate their model of the world. And from there, she would do whatever she needed to do. But that approach worked way better than, my old approach would be like, I don't understand, right? Why would they do this? And so that I was more judgy about it. And so that one shift goes a long way to building relationships with people. And you can appreciate somebody's model of the world and still set boundaries where you need to, or give them an answer they're not wanting. So you can get curious about that, looking for what, if we stand back and watch what matters to them most, what are they focusing on? What are they paying attention to? How do they respond to various situations? What do they think is the most important thing in a situation? Are they focusing on themselves or other people? Right? Are they focused more on tasks or on people? So there are a lot of different patterns that people have, and the more we notice, the easier it is.
Yeah. There are so many patterns that people run, and when we assume that we know what's going on with them before really getting curious and kind of watching, it can derail us, and we can think that, oh, we're not getting the communication, or we're not connecting with that person, or there's just no way around this person, right? I can't deal with that kind of person. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. And in my work with really thousands of people, one of the things I discovered was that we're all pretty similar, and the struggles we have are very similar to each other. But I didn't know that before. I was always before I started to do this work, I was very shy, and other people were kind of mysterious, or I would make certain assumptions about, how they were different, or I could never be like them. And through just getting to know and help this many people, it's very interesting to see that when we have people come to our clinics and we have these, big binders like this, right? So we have multiple big binders where people talk about their results. Often the reaction is that the new person will say, wow, I didn't realize I'm not the only one, because they thought that they were the only one struggling or the only one doing what they're doing. So you start to see that there are a lot of common things that people do. Some are helpful, some are not as useful. But I think that looking at it that way is better than judging it, right? If we say, oh, that's good or that's bad, or I should do it or I shouldn't do it, there's self judgment. But if we say, hey, is this useful to get the outcome, or is it unuseful to get the outcome? It's a more useful way to look at it.
Yeah. So the first thing is you got to know what the outcome is in order to decide who the model is going to be to help get you there. So
Right.
how would we know if we've got a bad model?
Well, if you know your outcome and you're modeling somebody and you see that you're discovering things that help you towards your outcome, then you've got a useful model, right? But sometimes models, we discover surprising things when we model people. It has to be okay, right? We can always choose another model. There's no, there are no rules around this, if that makes sense. So you want to be very just curious and experimental and very easy breezy about this whole thing. And then just let yourself discover. And I think that what's most helpful is if you know what your outcome is and you're always revisiting that and having some perspective and noticing, hey, is this taking me closer to my outcome, or is it taking me away from my outcome? Is it taking things too far? Right? Where might this be useful and where might it not be useful? Because sometimes people have a behavior that's useful in one context but not another. So there are nuances to this. But I think for people who are new to this, the first step is to just start with the concept of modeling and scanning the world for examples that you would like to model. Just start with that and play with it. And with experience, you'll get better and better, and you'll hone your ability to pick the useful models for you.
Yeah. And hopefully this podcast can be a resource for people, because the whole idea here is that we are going to be exploring what all kinds of different people in all kinds of different areas of life are doing, how they're interacting, what their, high level values are, how they're breathing and holding their body so that they can get success in all of these different areas. And it'll be really handy too, because you'll be able to watch them and even hear their intonation and, see how they hold their body. So yeah.
Yeah.
So, Robbie, is there anything else that you feel like people need to know about modeling before they're ready to just, dive right in, start looking around the world for people who are succeeding the way they want to succeed and start trying it on for themselves?
Um, I think just getting started with it and keeping the outcome in mind is important. Have an eye as you're doing it. There are times when we might need to choose to stop modeling people, right? That it happens. I'd say most people are good people and they're well intentioned and there are useful things we can learn from them. But sometimes there are people who are really good at certain things that might not be a great choice. And so if that happens, you got to be willing to just switch. It's not a big deal. So I think sometimes, with hypnosis, sometimes people worry that they're going to get stuck in hypnosis or that they're going to give themselves a suggestion that's going to hurt them or something. And it's so important to know you can just keep changing it, right? You do it and you change it and you change it again and you change it again. And as long as you see that it's an ever changing experience, then you'll land on the useful things. But I think a lot of flexibility and movement is important. And at the same time, stay with a model long enough that you can get the insight of how they do things.
So
So sometimes that can
when you,
happen in a minute. It can happen in weeks or months, right? You'll just know when you get the insight.
yeah, when it's been long enough that you've modeled that model and you've had the experience and you kind of know, right? And then if it's working for you, then that can adopt that and that can just become the way that you do things too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So you had said something before about, going too far.
Mhm.
What do you mean by going too far?
Oh, well, I guess, if we look at useful or unuseful, there are some people in the world that don't have the best intentions, we'll say, right? So most people do have good intentions, but there are some people who don't, for various reasons. And so I think the intentions behind what we're doing really matter. And sometimes people who are very talented and skilled are not in that category of having good intentions. So we can sometimes learn things from them, but to keep in mind what the right dose is, if that makes sense. So an example that a kind of easy example of this is at the gym I go to, there's a fitness instructor who teaches a boot camp type class. And she's great, right? She's like on it, she pushes you. And then she subbed for a more relaxing restorative class. And she came with that same mood and attitude, and it didn't work because we're there to relax. And so what would be useful for her is to learn how to model somebody who can have the flexibility to go from being intense to being more relaxed, if that makes sense, right? So if we were modeling her and we were always super intense, there are situations in life where that's not useful. So we would want to notice that and be able to let that go. Right.
Yeah.
And she is, I believe she's a well-intentioned person, but it's an example of where you might want to say, yeah, this is useful here or not there. There's a dose of this that's useful. Then there are people who do not have good intentions. Right. And it's just the reality. So if that's true, you'll notice, like somewhere along the line, you'll notice, and that's okay. Just switch gears. That's all you need to do. Easy.
Yeah. So it's okay to have lots of different models for different areas of your life and try on, this works here and this works better over here, and just really be loose and playing around with it.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So Robbie, thank you so much for joining us and for helping us kind of get into the feel for this. Is there a way that people can reach out to you if they want to explore this more? Because as I had mentioned, Robbie is the head of Hypnosis Training Canada, and so if you are curious about some of what we're talking about and the hypnotic way of being in life, she does training not only for people who want to be hypnotists, but also for people who have self-development or businesses of their own that want to use these skills to level up, really. So how can people get a hold of you, Robbie?
So hypnosistrainingcanada.com is the website, and you can use the Hypnosis Training Canada handle on all the social media. We have a YouTube channel as well. There is a podcast on our website that you can listen to. And so we do one-on-one custom programs. We do group programs for individuals and business owners and corporations. So if you're interested, you can set up a free consultation to meet with me either in person or on Zoom to see what you need and see if this is a good fit for you. And that's all on the website.
Awesome. Thank you again, Robbie. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
Well, I think it's the image of this that I believe is useful is to see like there's this smorgasbord of people that you can learn from in life. And so you want to be sampling lots of different people's ways of living so that you have more choices. And I think that if you look at it that way, then you'll make progress for sure in this area and benefit from it.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it too, because, depending on what you pick from that smorgasbord, you're going to feel a different way. You're going to get a different outcome from it. So yeah,
That's right.
that's a beautiful image. Okay. Thank you so much again, Robbie. It was wonderful connecting with you, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right, great. Thanks, Jessica.